Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Want to welcome folks that are viewing as well as those folks that are present today. Want to welcome you to the Cincinnati School Board Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee. And we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves. We have a full agenda as always, and not only a full agenda, but obviously very critical topics today. And we'll start over there with our guest from the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers.
Jeremy Gullihu, Chief Information Officer.
Nan Hagood, Manager of State and Federal Programs.
Good morning. I'm Cody Hutchins, Contract Analyst.
Shauna Murphy, Superintendent.
Brandon Craig, Board Member.
Jim Crossett, Board Member.
Kevin Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting and Transparency.
Michael Guston, Assistant Treasurer.
Phyllis Davis, Board's Administrative Assistant.
Rob Wilson, technician, and if you'd like to speak during the speaking of the public, please click your hand icon. We will ask you your name and association to the district, and we'll invite you in at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
We have an agenda that we need to get through, and everything's equally important, but some is more time sensitive than the other. But I would like to, if we could, to go down to in the old business to number 3, because I think that will require the least amount of discussion or decision making. I would like today, if it's possible, for finance not to vote, but to be able to pull out of finance a recommendation regarding 5-year forecast, regarding the levy recommendation. We do that anyway, but I'd like to formalize that a little bit more because, as we mentioned a couple months ago, we think it's pretty important for Finance Committee to be as united and as influential as possible to make some of these bigger decisions and might influence somebody along the line. But we'll start with the levy options and presentation. And Assistant Treasurer, is that you?
I believe it is.
All
right. Hey, Rob, if you, yes, thank you. And if you could go to the last slide, sir. I think just a follow-up from our last business meeting. We had a nice robust discussion about the levy, about options for November. So I'll bring this slide back. This is kind of the again, pick one item from each of these 3 columns, and that'll give us give us what we need for the resolution. So the bold items are, I would say, the ones that feeling is that I think most people landed on based on our conversation about substitute levies, other options, input from our partners at Preschool Promise, who came a couple months ago. So I mean, there it is. I don't know. Ready for questions or comments?
Yes. Board members have any comments for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Mike kind of summed it up at the last board meeting. It was kind of the stance. I don't really have a preference between renewal or substitute. I think both of them will kind of share some of the same concerns or issues with getting passage. But if it's easier for folks to hear the word renew as opposed to substitute or some other language, I think that'd be helpful. I think I would ask is this, that we, at some point, whenever we make our decision, work with the folks from Preschool Promise and our own preschool programming to put together something that would at least allow us to have a selling point to why this levy would be important. I think that's the preschool issue is an issue that I think a lot of folks seem to respond well to our ability to be on the cutting ground for, or the being a leader for. And so if it's something that we can share as an accomplishment or something we've done well, it helps improve the image around the levy.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Mr. Crossett?
Yes, I generally in agreement with Board Member Craig. I do have probably a little stronger preference for renewal over substitute, just because I think it's going to be confusing to the electorate. And also, I think if we want to go back and ask for more money a year from now or 2 years from now, we can say that we haven't really asked for any new money at all. So I think that's an important message with the renewal. I also think we had a presentation from the Preschool Promise leadership asking for a renewal, not for a substitute. So it's another thing that I think is important to emphasize. And I do think that it'll be important to get really good data about the effectiveness of preschool promise and use that for helping us achieve success with the renewal. Thank you.
Second, what both the members have said, my only question is regarding the substitute piece, is that would generate some more revenue for us. Is there, what kind of an amount, do we have any anticipation of what that could be?
Yeah, so we did some modeling on that. Unfortunately, it's kind of diminishing returns. So the way the substitute levy works is on new property, new values, you get whatever the millage rate is at that time, on that year, added on to your thing. So we did some modeling, like the first year, it was a little over $300,000, and then it diminishes over time. So really, it's a risk reward, I think. As everyone's discussed, do we take the risk of having some longer ballot language, having a substitute, people asking questions for it, for the potential reward of 300,000, and it diminishes from there down to over the 10 years. I think it ends at like 100,000. So on a $48 million overall levy, it's a small amount.
Very important. I appreciate that. And yes, it's not worth the risk. But we want to always communicate to people that we need the money. And it's not like we're turning away from the money, but we're making the decision that the risk is just too great at this time for voters to be able to change. So my hope would be, we obviously Finance Committee recommends obviously doing this. I would hope that we would take this to the Audit Committee too, even after the board has acted, so that the Audit Committee can be familiar with what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think you've brought it up before, but just to keep them within the loop, I think that would be helpful. And we want to be able, when we go to the public, we want to say our Community Audit Committee is also recommending that this renewal take place. And to Ms. Davis, I would hope that this is not something that the board would have a lengthy discussion. And does this usually end up being a resolution? I think, Brandon, is it a
Well,
resolution?
so we have to pass a resolution saying that with the language and stuff with
Mhm.
regards to us wanting to renew the levy, and then we would come back once we know the millage, if I'm correct remembering.
Yes.
Then we would come back and pass the actual resolution for the levy itself.
So I believe the first resolution's titled, like, it's basically titled Statement of Need, right? So the board is saying that we've determined there is a need to put this levy on the ballot. And then we take it to the and get a calculation and get the
Right.
language, and then we pass the second.
And I believe it is on the board agenda for Monday night. And I think we just emphasize to the president and everybody that this is a perfunctory kind of thing we're doing. We've discussed this at least 4 times with the full board, and just to take action would be good. So thank you very much, everybody, especially the administration for the work.
If I may,
Yes, please.
I will say for people who aren't used to this, there will be the official language says something like in excess of the 10 mil floor. And that is just official lange.
Can't do anything about it.
That is part of every single levy. So
Great. Thanks for adding that. And forgive me for not asking if there was something else that needed to be said. Let's go, if we could, to the financial website update. I think that's number 2 on old business. And I believe that is you again, Assistant Treasurer.
Sure. We'll make this very quick. But I do want to thank Mr. Ashley. He's done carried most of the work on this.
Yes.
So I don't even know if you need to go to the slides, but if you go out to our district website and click on financial information, you'll see we've got some new pages out there. We got some new links, refreshed a lot of the wordage. Other thing, just to remind the public, is we are now live with Ohio Checkbook. So that is a statewide program where folks can go in and they can look at their school district, their city, their county, and you can see where money goes. And so we've been uploading now, after last Finance Committee, we've been uploading monthly that data. So I think that's it, unless there's questions.
Questions? Any questions about the website? Thank you for the work, and It's a matter of transparency and the public can access it
Yeah.
directly.
Yes.
So thank you for all the heavy lifting, Kev.
One thing I think is
Sure.
nice about it is it's transactional, so you can actually drill down to transactions. Some of
Wow.
the things like payroll are batched, journal entries are batched. But if you want to see payments to a particular vendor, you can, the website's a little wonky, but once you figure out how to search it, you can search by vendor, by fund. So it does have a little more detail than just the high level
think
stuff
that's
we do in
great.
finance.
That's great. And that too, in a renewal year, that's crucial. And knowing what we face in the next several years, it's great that we have that as a foundation. I know on a number of occasions, CPS has led in that kind of transactional transparency, and appreciate this update. Let's if we could, something new and still about transparency, if we go down to the new business, Mike, do you have the school financial health indicators, which is, this is new, more ways than just on the agenda as new business.
This is new, yes. Rob, if you'll go to the monthly reports slide deck. I don't remember the slide. I'm sorry. We're keeping Rob very busy today. So
I'm happy.
while he's pulling it up, just so that we have, it's the other slide
Sure.
deck, Rob. Okay, so while he's pulling that up, it's funny, we just got the press release this morning from the auditor
Yes,
state.
this is cool.
Like literally hot off a lot of these things are hot off the presses. So the auditor of state is rolling out a thing called school financial health indicators. They've been doing this for cities and municipalities since about 2016. And so they decided to bring in the schools. And
course.
we got the first look at it beginning of this month. And it is live now, so anyone can go out and look. Kevin and I were actually looking at other school districts to see. So the idea of this, and they call it like a financial physical, like if you think about, you go to get a physical every month or every year, hopefully. So the idea of that is that they take our audited financial statements. So these are the financial statements from the past 7 years, and they put it through an analysis tool. And they rank us on up to 16 different areas. Are you helping, Rob?
Sorry.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. Yes, as I remember, so they rank us on up to 16 different categories. And the way they do that is a stoplight system, right? So every category is either green, which means you're good, yellow, which means you're cautionary, or red, which means you're critical.
And this is on board docs.
It is. It is on board docs. It is.
So the public is able to see this.
Yeah. Thank you. There you go, Rob. So perfect. Slide 36. Yes.
Is on both of them.
Yep. So if you go ahead and go to slide 36. So as I mentioned, this is, if you go to that, yeah, as I mentioned, it's, the stoplight kind of thing. What they always say is no one indicator says you're in distress, but what they look for is a combination. So
Okay.
they're looking for 5 reds or a combination of 7 reds and yellows. And we'll see this in a minute. If the AOS thinks you're in fiscal distress, they reach out, they will send a letter to the treasurer, the superintendent, and the president of the board, and offer their assistance in getting you back on track. Next slide, please. So looking at our 2024 indicators, we did really well. So there are 2 indicators that do not apply to us. One is, and these are the black boxes. So one of those is income tax, which we don't have. And there's another one that just doesn't apply to schools. And then
Okay.
in the document, it just says doesn't apply to schools. So, okay.
Okay.
So we'll move
Everybody
on.
got that box.
Yeah, it's sort of like the points every kid gets for their name on the test, right?
Okay.
But honestly, we did really well. We only have 2 yellows, no reds. So
And yellow means again,
yellow is cautionary.
okay, and what's that about?
And so what you can kind of see in the graphs there at the bottom is for every indicator, they define a range, right? So you could say on a 10-point scale, if you're between 0 and 3, you're red. If you're between 3 to 5, you're yellow. If you're above 5, you're green. And so we have two yellows. One of those is percentage of general fund revenues that exceed expenditures. And you can see we've kind of dropped there and actually dipped back up. So we were red in 23. We're up to yellow in 24. This graph is kind of odd, and Kevin will tell you why. If you look at the 2 years that were really high in the green up there, those were the years that we were in school-wide pool. And so instead of an expenditure, that was showed as a transfer. So it looks really good that we transferred that money to school-wide pool and then spent it out of that fund, but
Well,
it makes your graphs look good.
it looks
But
good at least for one time.
it looks good for one time,
Like a
but
broken clock, at one time it'll be right.
I mean, I hate to say a 1-point trend, but the 1-point trend is we're in the right direction. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. Everyone's keeping an eye on that. It makes sense. You don't want to be spending over your revenues. For any organization, that is a red flag, or at least a yellow flag. The other one is total liabilities to net assets. You can see we actually went for over years from red to yellow. So we are moving down. So we are moving the right direction there. The thing I will say about this one is these are audited financial statements. So liabilities is a really interesting thing. Kevin can tell you all the calculations he has to do for that. But part of making our financial statements into something that is, kind of industry wide is converting all of our retirement liabilities. So even though there's a really
Will we carry that too? I mean, on this?
there's yeah.
Yeah, we carry a portion of the state systems, even though we do not intend to pay those directly. Part of it is it was a GASB from a couple years ago, a pronouncement that required us to, because ultimately if the pension plan failed, let's say, they would come back to the members, the entities, and look for recourse. So basically there was a lot of discussion when it first came out about, is this really our liability? And at the end of the day, it is something we have to present, and it fluctuates from year to year. So that's another thing. It's something out of our control that is going to continue to affect us. So I think that's one reason one indicator may not even be in your control. And to me, that's one that's not necessarily in our control, but we'll continue to monitor it.
Mr. Crossett?
If you took that liability out of the calculation, would we be in the green?
Maybe not, because it's a pretty good gap from the blue dot to the yellow. We might still be in the cautionary category, but debt liabilities, all of those things factor into these. So yeah.
Ms. Craig? Superintendent, we good? Okay. Thank you. I do think the idea that we were someplace and it got better is interesting. It might be something to think about. Are there other areas there that we had some issues and it's gotten better? Or just hopefully that we don't need to turn that leaf over?
I think we need to, take a closer look at those. These two yellows, I believe, were in the prior. So what they did, they went back 1 year and gave us what the indicators would have been for last year. And I think we had maybe 2 reds and 2 yellows or something. So there definitely was improvement from last year to this year across the board. But we'll take a closer look at those. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what they related to, but they give you the detail of how they calculated each one.
Excellent.
So, and this is new for all of us in school finance. So I'm sure over the course of the next year, we'll learn more, and who knows, they may tweak some of their things as they get feedback from all of us. And
does this help us figure out with things that we need to be focused on or looking at, or is it at all helpful, or is it just a matter of being transparent to the public?
I would say more B. So one of the interesting, it's good we're doing these two things together. But remember, this is a backwards looking indicator. And we're going to do the forecast in a few minutes, which is a forward looking indicator. So it does give you an idea of your relative strength over time, but we're always looking backwards a year.
Okay, thank you. I think it's kind of cool. Oh, good. Hey, Jen, wanna augment? What's
Good
up?
mo- Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I
Good
can't.
morning.
I just wanted to say in relation to your question, President Bolton Vice President Chair
Yeah.
Bolton.
There you go. Board member is fine.
Yeah, I think there'd be value in looking at their calculations on each specific ratio, because then even though it's backward looking, you can start anticipating or making plans to improve those specific ratios. For example, like the debt to asset ratio, you could use that indicator to say, well, when we're facing the decision if we want to take on debt for some improvement project, it's going to have this impact on this ratio. Or there could be we haven't received details on what all those individual ratios are, so it's hard to give you an example, but there would be value in understanding them and then using that information to make forward financial decisions. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. Appreciate it. Well, this is, I'm liking that they're doing this, and I think we look good.
Just
I'm
another
not
tool,
surprised.
just another tool for the public.
There you go, another tool for the public. And speaking of the public, we're gonna also go into new business and have if she is prepared and ready, as she always is, our chief is gonna be able to present as is in our work plan. So our internal audit chief, please do your presentation for us.
Well, thank you all. So I will ask Rob to transition over to the internal audit update slides. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. It's an exciting time of transition. We reported and closed out our fiscal 2025 internal audit plan at the last audit committee meeting in April. Since then, Isaac Carn and I, this is not a part of the slides, but Isaac Carn and I had the pleasure of going to the 2025 ALGA, Association of Local Government Auditors Conference, and speaking about the great work that we've done, really the work that Isaac's led on the status of past recommendations and the follow-up process. And we presented live in front of about 500 auditors. So
Cool.
we got a lot of great feedback, and I think people were impressed with the rigor of work that we've been able to accomplish between our team and management, and of course with the board and audit committee support. So just wanted to mention all of that. It was a great opportunity. So diving in, looking ahead now to fiscal 2026, I wanted to share a couple of quick updates and gauge the finance committee's interest in participating in the next steps. So for the public, reminder of the role of internal audit. It's listed there on this slide, but most importantly, as I said today, what are our next steps for fiscal 2026 internal audit plan? So again, as a brief reminder, the internal audit cycle occurs the same way each year. And we are now entering the May-June timeframe, which is our strategic risk assessment and planning phase. That will then lead us to our July audit committee meeting, where we will present the plan and ask for review and approval of the plan. And then after that, we get right into the work and off we go again. So this is a bit more detail than likely is needed, but I wanted to highlight each of the steps that we go through from essentially the beginning of planning all the way through the development of the internal audit plan. I think this is a point that Board Member Crossett highlighted during our Just Ask Jen session, is that internal audit selects projects that are risk-based, that are based on strategic direction. And so this is a good way to show the public and of course our finance committee members how we go about this process. So where you'll see a couple of items to highlight are the opportunities coming here with planning surveys in our upcoming meetings with management, the audit committee, as well as board members if they are interested in participating. All of that leading us there to hopefully, as I mentioned, an approval of a strong and robust plan in July. So moving to the next slide here, I certainly won't read through all of the inputs, but as we develop methodologies, we are trying to balance a strategic and mathematical scientific approach with professional judgment, logic, and reason. And so you'll see that there's various items that go into the development of the plan. Some are qualitative, some are quantitative. But I think the thing that's a little different this year, and why I wanted to really highlight that through today's conversation, is that it's, no surprise to any of us that we are facing some strategic and budgetary changes. So how does internal audit adapt and support that work this year? So we've had pretty extensive conversations between the superintendent, assistant treasurer, and likely with our treasurer when she returns about how do we support and play a more critical role as things potentially shift and change as it relates to budget, limited resources, and potentially those impacts on process. So you'll see here highlighted in the purple at the bottom of the slide, that's where we really want to come up with a way to weight that a little bit more heavily than perhaps in years past. So again, this is really the adaptation this year, is how do we become a proactive partner for the district? And as I mentioned, those budgetary impacts. So as we think of a change in a process, so the process used to have X number of resources, now they have less. So how do we adapt and change processes, streamline our controls to ensure that the outcome, whether it's compliance related, operational based, where we have to continue paying our employees or whatever the case might be, how do we redesign controls with the resources available? And then I think the other side of it too is a little bit more of a proactive take. So we can analyze things hopefully before we were to find that we were missing a control due to a change, if that makes sense. So again, I just wanted to highlight the quote at the bottom there. We're not just looking back. I know that's as auditors, sometimes it's retro perspective. This year, I think the really critical role between partnering with our leadership teams is how do we look ahead and get ahead of things? And I think internal audit will play a bit more of a critical role in that regard this year. So where are we headed next? Just briefly wanted to share with you where our next steps entail. So we are right now finalizing our methodology, trying to adapt, like I said, for the budgetary impacts and how we'll incorporate that into our work. But what that means for these groups and the folks here is opportunities to engage with each of you. So our approach is to develop a survey that's hopefully quick, simple, straightforward, share that with management, senior leadership as we do each year, but also would like to extend that to our audit committee members and board members with an option to indicate if you would like an in-person meeting as well. So being mindful of everyone's time, if we do have a number of folks who are interested, I think we spoke with the audit committee about doing some subgroups of a couple members, being mindful of, public quorum and whatnot, but really trying to get our arms around using the data that perhaps we can collect and then seeking insights from our other stakeholders. So just wanted to mention that survey should be coming soon. It's noted in the dates above. The surveys hopefully will go out the last week of May, and then we can get right into those planning. So just wanted to take the opportunity to preface the work that is coming and get your insights, feedback, and any questions you might have.
I thank you, and I like the idea that we have to look forward, but also you obviously understanding and seizing the critical nature of where we are, and that does have to change how we approach many things, not by our own fault, but by the environment in which we're operating. Members have comments, questions?
Yeah, again, I've said for a while now, I think, Lauren, you're doing a phenomenal job with reimagining how we think about internal audit. I think in the past, we've just really done it as something needs to be checked on, and then we check on it. And I think that notion did not always think about the fact that things don't have systems in place, things don't have things prepared to really allow for some of that work to be done. And so I think the only thing I would maybe put into the thought process or the frame of reference is just that I don't want us to also overextend what internal audit's purpose is, right? Because I do think that's the one thing that we were getting a little bit far down the line with at times, is because you all were having to go back and check on somebody 3 or 4 times to see whether or not something was actually what was being implemented, or whether or not this was actually working, or whether or not they even had a system yet. That all of the things that we put in as ideas, or all the things that you all decide to kind of take on or task, is just make sure that we are not over leveraging the work that's already still being done with projects that are still being monitored, the other work that's still happening. Because I do think that's the other part that I think we started to see a little bit of that, especially with I think, for instance, the school audits. It was a great idea to do. What we learned in the process of it was to do it took so much time and effort and so much away from the other work you were doing. because they weren't prepared for it. And so I think some of the proactive stuff of getting folks prepared, getting folks looking at their systems, making sure that we can work with management to really ensure everybody's operating and a methodology to our operation that makes it easier for things to flow and more efficient will make it easier for you all to do these different projects. And so I think it's just maybe the evaluation of some stuff that may come up that, again, always sounds like a great idea. And I think we always want to do it, but it's making sure that we're using the time best for you all.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Mr. Crossett?
Yeah, I think I like, continue to do the risk-based assessment. But I do think that your comment about focusing on the future, not so much on the past, is going to be important. I don't think it's out of the realm for you guys to emphasize maybe doing a little more operational auditing versus financial auditing and help us look for cost efficiencies. That could be a big benefit to the district in the environment that we're operating in, to borrow the words from our chair. But I also echo Board Member Craig in that I think you have a pretty good dashboard to reflect the recommendations that have not yet been implemented. And certainly making that more visible will help maybe accelerate some of those things to happen. So thank you.
I think it's great, the thinking forward. And of course, the danger is always making sure as you're thinking forward and being so kind of influential in what it is that we need to be thinking about, somehow still maintaining that separation, and not being drawn into the wrestling match, so to speak. So appreciate this work. And again, it's one of our crowning jewels, I think, that we've had this committee, community audit committee, and a wonderful internal audit group of folks. It makes selling a levy a lot easier, I will tell you, out in public. So if other comments, questions, as always, thank you. Let's we want to make sure the thing we must get done today is the 5-year forecast. But before we do that, let's see if we have a new and Reader's Digest version of our monthly financial report. I'm dating myself and my parents on that one. What have we got?
Kevin, you want me to do the fast version?
There's the
Sorry.
normal one, and then there's
Okay.
team it up however you want to.
I mean, we can do this. There's the slide. Thank you. No. That won't do that. If you go to the next slide, Rob, just quickly, we'll go through our cash and investments. The end of April, we had $239 million across all funds.
Jeez.
Yeah, most of it's tied up in things that, yes. Our operating cash was pretty low because we waited as long as we could to transfer money from Star Ohio. So the transfer was actually initiated on the 30th, hit on the 1st, so we don't show it here, but we are trying hard to get every penny of interest earnings we can.
Good.
On the money we have. So trying every way to squeeze out some more revenue. You go to the next slide, you'll see the operating account balance is low, but again, we did a transfer the next day, which pushed it back up. Next slide, Rob. You can see there, general fund cash balance was 95.1 million at the end of the month. Debt service,
Say that again. It was what?
$95.1 million at the end of the month. So again, remember, we're in the period now where our cash balances decrease until July. So we're just going to continue to go like this as we spin through the taxes that we have. So nothing really substantial there. You go to general fund, you can see cash balance is down a little from last year. Encumbrances are up a little from last year, but nothing hugely significant there.
But that's good that the encumbrances are up, or is that bad?
I don't know that it's good or bad.
Okay.
This
Timing.
is, it's really, so So one of the things that we do is we have our cutoff for entering new
Right.
requisition request, and that's always right at the end of April. So usually you would see, like, depending on how well people follow the deadline, encumbrances might be up. So it might mean that more
Gotcha.
people follow the deadline. It could mean that we haven't paid things. So it's hard to really,
Oh.
tell if it's a good or bad. It is. How about that?
It is.
It is.
It is in being.
Yep, you can see, go 2 slides, Rob. So there's revenues. You can see there, we're up a little on taxes, down a little on state aid. Imagine that.
What a surprise.
No surprise there. Anything else, Kevin? That's the revenues. I feel bad taking your thunder here, but
No,
but you also get the 5-year forecast.
right.
2 more slides, Rob. We'll look at expenditures. You can see we're higher than last year on salaries and benefits, lower than last year on everything else, but that also includes a tax anticipation note. So you take that out. I think we're right there, I would say. So every year there is some anomaly that we have to put in these reports. So the tax anticipation note will be for the next couple of years. Before that, it was the school-wide pool.
Mhm.
So just know it's there. And if you go 2 more slides around the pie chart, you can see where we're at. We're over about 2/3 of our spending is spent or encumbered or already spent. I'm sorry. Have our encumbrances there. We have our, remaining money that's dedicated for payroll. So that gives us a tiny little percent of unencumbered budget. So 1.3%. Last year we were about 2%. So we are getting to the end of the year. As we said, we should be done with new encumbrances. And, we have, I think, 3 payrolls left, I think. So we're getting.
As long as you know that,
I had to remember, I'm like, well, we didn't get paid this week, we'll get paid next week. Okay. Perfect. All right. And then to sum it all up is a statement of cash flows. Since people always look at negative numbers, I will explain the negative in general property tax. So that is our settlement. So every time we get an advance, we just put it in general property taxes. And then when we do the settlement, the county will tell us where to put different line items. So really the big one is you move some money from general property tax to tangible personal property.
do members have any questions about this thus far on these monthly financials? Mr. Craig.
I just, not so much a question, but I think it's just something that for us to really keep in mind is that I know we talked about it before with regard to the policy on cash balance. And I think the earlier slides with regard to revenue are a good example of why this is something that we, as we go forward, continually need to be paying attention to. Because, again, we have ability to move some funds here and there, but the longer term health is when we don't have to do those things in order to maintain our status. And so I just think, again, it's worthwhile pointing out that is something we need to think about as we go forward in future years.
Mr. Crossett, any comment? No. Continue. Preschool?
I'll let you do preschool. Oh, okay. You're the preschool. Turn your mic.
That's all good. Just a couple highlights here from March to April, minimal change. I think we've talked about before, February, March tends to be the high mark, I think, for the number of kids enrolled. So that's good, fairly consistent. And then of course they'll be done after May. And then the next slide shows the tuition assistance calculation. Pretty much the same trend as this year. Because of those pilot seats for the ECE grant, fewer are falling down to that last dollar in calculation for tuition assistance, but we know what that's based on. The next slide just kind of gives an accounting for the levy portion that's designated for preschool expansion. And so you can see that's fairly consistent with the prior year as well. I think we've made all the United Way payments for this year. And we'll have another month of tuition assistance calculation, and then we'll have to do a journal entry for those as well. Next slide shows the number of students benefiting from tuition assistance, either full-time, half-time, or however they're categorized, but it's been fairly consistent this year at 780 was for April. And then,
And those are years that we're looking at or what?
yes, so the darker blue line is the current year. And so you can see month to month what the level of number of students was. Last year was the green, the year before was the orange, the year before was the light blue. So every year it was increasing until this year. And again, those pilot seats captured, at least 120 seats. So if we hadn't had that funding source come about this year, that number would have been more up with the green.
Considering, if I could, considering the levy or the renewal, I mean, this is the kind of chart that will have to be explained to somebody because everything else is showing growth and then,
Correct.
and so just kind of as we look at these, make sure that this is the kind of thing to pull out. Because people get real specific about the preschool piece. Mr. Crossan,
You might even want to do a chart, sort of an as-if chart, so that
Excellent.
maybe there's less explanation you have to provide.
Okay.
that's
Thank you
great.
for that feedback.
Mr. Craig?
Just one quick question with regards to the tuition assistance, which it appears at this point they were a little bit below where we were expecting to be for the total amount for and so I just wonder, are there more, are we expecting more to still come in that would get us up? Because the budgeted amount was like, I think we had 7 million on the one chart. Go back one, Rough. For the full year.
So that's the expense. That's
Yeah.
calculating the expense. The revenue, we budgeted 15.5 and it's at 15.6.
No, I mean, I guess the expense of the tuition assistance.
Oh, gotcha. It's definitely going to be lower because that budget was based on not having those extra seats, extra funding. So that should come in. Last year, the actual was 6.4, which I believe was a little below the budget of the prior year as well. So,
Okay.
but the key takeaway probably from this chart is the revenue that's designated for our share and the portion that goes to United Way and used
Yes.
by CCP is 15.6. And we are spending that carryover that was there. And so the expenditure budget was 17. It may come in closer to 15 this year, potentially. But in the last few years, it's kind of been a deficit spend.
Any other questions, comments about that?
Ms. Bolton?
Yes, gotcha.
Yeah. So in relation to your conversation about the levy and presenting that line chart,
Uh-huh.
I think it would be more that's good, but in addition to that, it would be beneficial to show a stacked bar chart that shows the number of CPS students supported by those funds, but then all the other CPS kids in preschool that are sorted by other funds. I don't want to show the public that we're only supporting 780 students. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I think that's good. I think the more information, the better, and the more we can be boastful, very frankly, and people really understand the kind of investment that's been made. I mean, we've made more investment, and the community has too, in preschool than anybody else in the tri-state area, let alone in the state of Ohio. I mean, we lead the way on preschool, and we have a great thing to message. But you're right, Jen. We should, the numbers we've got, let's show them all.
So even yes,
transparency.
a historical perspective would show how we are being diligent of doing last dollar in because we've brought in new sources to support, like the pilot program, for example.
And we honored that pledge.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it, Jen.
Of course.
Mr. Crossett?
Question, Jen, to clarification, are you talking about including like Head Start classrooms?
Yes, we have, we spend, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's like $16 million a year on preschool. The levy, the students that are supported by the levy is just like a very small portion of that. So we need to keep honoring the whole picture and all those other funding sources. How Creative Vera is incredibly good at maximizing funding for our students. And so
Thank you. Thank
yeah.
you. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Good point. And frankly, as we prepare for the renewal, hopefully the administration is putting together that kind of package to be able to present to the community and the best foot forward. Continue.
All right, I think we're up to state and federal grants.
Grants.
Ms. Haygood.
All right, and I will keep this short and sweet in the interest of time.
Love it.
I don't have very many slides this week. This is just showing where we're at. As Mike already pointed out, we had a kind of big rush of contracts and requisitions coming in April. So we're just on the general upward trend from the end of the year spending, but still well above our goal of 57%. Next slide. We are, again, continuing to spend out and encumber. I just would like to give a shout out to our non-public specialist, Jill Blair. She's worked really hard with our non-public schools to help them spend their money. And that's really helpful to us because they get their carryover kind of first. And so they have really done a great job of spending out their grant funds through really a lot of effort for that.
I wouldn't even have been thinking about that.
Yeah.
Can I just say this is the
Please.
first time we've ever had a 100%. We've been doing the same slide for
A long time.
a long time. This is the first time we've ever had a 100%. So
Well, I think that's super.
that's pretty awesome.
And again, the interfacing with us and the private schools and parochial schools or non-CPS schools, this is a message that does not get out to the community at all. That we are,
No, they're still our kids, and we.
they're all
so
our
that's
kids
not-
and that's the way it should be.
So she's, like I said, she's just made a dramatic improvement this year. so
Absolutely.
Good. Kudos to her. The next slide, we can just that's just again, our position. We have very few changes, with amounts coming in. And then the last one I have here is our current position. I went ahead and just to make these numbers a little more clear, since it's kind of a confusing process, ticked off the ones that we're clear on as far as sweeps. So you can see most of the grants were in great shape as far as spending and no threat of any kind of loss of funds when we file our FERs. We've only got a few that are kind of down below our goal of 57%, but they have a lot of things scheduled for the summer. So we have a lot of summer activities, especially at our satellite location. So I expect those to tick up as those charges come in. We've also got quite a few contracts out there. So I think we're looking good. We're trying to, not just spend the money, but spend it in a thoughtful, impactful way. So our goal is not to spend the money, it's to spend it in ways that benefit the kids. And so it's, I just want to emphasize that we want to spend it carefully and thoughtfully.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. Crossett, Mr. Craig? Sounds like a law firm. Crossett and Craig.
Good job.
I do love the check boxes. I love that.
Yeah.
Very, very clear. You can see which ones we can go on and which ones we're still.
That's great. Return on investment, summer school.
Reader's Digest version, right?
You know it.
All righty. Next slide, Mr. Robin. Hopefully, a lot of this information is not new news as it was in a summer fast document. So I just kind of summarized the information that was in there.
Thank you.
First one is just talk about the students registered. As you can see, we had a little spike there in 2021 and 22 following COVID and all of that. So summer school just ticked up naturally there. Next slide, Mr. Rob. This one just kind of summarizes budget. First slide up on the upper left corner just shows how the budget has trended over the past few years since 2019. Just some clarification, 2019 and 2020 look a little low. I did put the numbers together for the budget. Some of the coding was a little inconsistent, so some of that could be a little higher, could be, I believe I captured it all, but I could be safe to say that 2019 and 2020 could be a little higher. But,
Okay.
just putting that out there. Then per pupil, what I did there was just took the students registered, divided by the students registered that year to give us that. And then the orange bar there is the average per pupil. So taking the average cost based on the budget over all of those years and all the student enrollment over all those years and kind of just compared it to see how each year compared to each other. And just kind of see how we're trending.
So a question about that.
Mr. Crossett.
Does that mean in 2021, 2022, the, I guess, student teacher ratios were much better? Does that mean that? I don't, maybe you can go back and answer that another day. Just curious.
Student teacher ratios during 21 and 22.
I can tell.
So this is the number registered that may make a difference in what that actual ratio was in terms of actual attendance.
Just say, remember the program for those years was a little different because
Ah.
those were the years where we did like the full day with enrichment And that was using the ESSER dollars.
You know, we needed to take a film of that because that'll never happen again.
Okay, don't waste any time on getting the answer to that.
No, do that. We need that information. Jen, did you have?
Yeah,
a
I just want to make a point that from year to year, the students who were eligible to participate in summer school changed. So during those COVID years, all children were invited to participate, while previous to that, we just focused on 3rd grade or 9th grade or graduation. And then now that the ESSER funds have disappeared, we're going back to being a little bit more specific about who invited to participate in summer school.
The pool was a very much more restrictive.
Correct.
Continue.
All right, next slide, Mr. Rupp. And so continuing to summarize the data, just high school credits earned are just something to focus on. When we talk about ROI, if we're spending money, what is our outcome? So looking at the different years and how they compare to each other, that just kind of gives a summation of the high school credits earned each year. And next slide, Mr. Rob. What I tried to do with that data next was just use the guides that were in the document already and from the wonderful teams that collected the data. It was already segregated out by school, so just representing that in a chart type. Only did back to 2022 just because if I put back to 2019, it got a little crazy and the graph was really hard to read. So thanks to my team for that feedback. But so yeah, this just shows the comparison of three years of what the schools have earned. And I believe the final slide for me, so this one was something I tried to do. So in the USAS manual, there's a function called 1910, and it talks about credit recovery or recovery money spent towards recovery for summer school and then different programs throughout the year. So what I wanted to do was take the money spent during summer school and look at anything that was coded to function 1920 to see if I could get a per pupil cost on what it costs to have those high school credits recovered. That doesn't include like transportation or social work services or anything like that is coded to a different code or a different function. That was only 1910. So this is at minimum what it would cost for those. And that was just my attempt to show a per pupil cost.
Questions, gentlemen? Mr. Craig?
I'll just say really quick, I think one of the things that we do see with regard to summer school is the nature of which we offer it also has been a determinant of how people participate. Mm-hmm. Where when it was open for everyone, we'd have folks who would sign up and start the year, we'd make investments, and then as that summer went along, they disappeared. And I think that may go better into what we think about, how we think about summer school in the future, is this something specifically for a purpose, such as credit recovery or graduation, more so than the opportunity, because I think that opportunity costs. We don't really see the benefit coming in when the student doesn't complete it, or when we have to pay out a teacher for an entire summer who has a class of 30 or 20 students one day, and then by the end of the summer, it's one, right? And I think that's the other thing is it's just changing that nature of it is helpful to understand how it can be beneficial, because there is still need for students to get the additional requirements, and we need staffing to be done in a way that gives people kind of clarity as to know what they're going to do. I worry when we do it more than just what is necessary to get people to passing, that we are going to be offering something that folks love in the beginning of the summer, but by midsummer are like, I got to go on my family trip. I got to go kids at this camp. My kid's doing that they're not participating anymore.
Much more the traditional view of summer school instead of, I think, something that was invented 15 years ago, which was fifth quarter. Where you basically had year-long school if you chose to participate. Lots of enhancement and enrichment and lots of remediation piece. It was a glorious time. There was money to do that. I think it was actually, some of that came from the Obama administration, similarly. So, any other questions about summer school? I'll keep going then.
Here's one CRA.
Thank you very much.
There's one CRA, so I'll submit as written about that.
Well, let's see, better get busy.
Yeah. Oh, man. No comments.
I'm not going to say a word today about the city of Cincinnati. I'm being very, very reserved. Continue. We took care of this part, right?
So we have the budget update and the forecast left.
All right, I love it. Pretty much on schedule. Forecast.
All right.
But we know who owns this.
Yeah. With a lot of input and help from
Well,
Mike and Jen as well.
Team wants to join in, absolutely, go for it, but
So
you're on.
we'll just go through the slides real quickly, and then we can talk more specifics. The first slide is pretty much repetitive information, so considerations that go into any forecast just to kind of set the stage. One of the things, it's the current year plus 4 years. And so if you're looking at 5 fiscal years, you're touching 3 state biennial budgets because they're each for 2 years. So just to, again, set the stage, it kind of makes it a little bit unpredictable. I think you're all aware of that. But other thing is inflationary rates over that period of time. I think there's more precision when you look at, year 1 and 2. A little less predictability for years 3, 4, and 5. Controlling spending levels in the general fund at the district level. Emphasize this again. Previous board and I believe the current board supports the fact that the district will try to live within the means of the annual revenues as we hope to kind of keep our cash balance up as well. But that's really a key factor. And one of the things we do build into this forecast is the assumption that we're going to control spending within that level of revenue. Maybe the last time we'll talk about the CLIF plan, but just to reemphasize that this year there's still an effect of those ESSER dollars coming back, and there's going to be residual effect of that for the next couple of years since we don't have those additional funding. District student enrollment projections versus actual enrollment is always somewhat of a hard thing to predict. So those things do change. I think Jeremy's team does a great job of mastering that process, and he understands how that's an estimation because there are factors outside of our control that we don't know. But anyway, that does play into our projections as well. And then obviously with this being collective bargaining time, any outcomes from that obviously will affect the future budgets as well. The next slide is kind of new information. This is kind of a synopsis of some of the potential state budget changes along with others, but just to highlight a few things that have been discussed. Key changes from the governor's budget to the House approved budget. As we've talked before, the governor's budget included the Fair School Funding Plan, did not update the base cost factors, and continued the phase in of the plan. The House plan essentially suspends the Fair School Funding Plan, but then freezes funding so that, except for some changes in enrollment and that kind of thing, that the guarantee continues and basically our revenue will remain flat or a little bit of an increase. One of the key things in this forecast that we were presenting is based on our current enrollments, our projected enrollments, as well as assuming that the state budget will be closer to the House version. Obviously that's an unknown. We have the Senate version to come. And then they'll have conference committee, and then the governor will have line item veto. So we've got a long way to go in about 6 weeks. So we'll see how that plays out. Another thing that's been a big discussion in the school district treasurer's world is a cap on cash carryover for districts. Good or bad, that's not really an issue for us because we don't have that much of a cash accumulation.
They'll find a way to make it pertain to us, I'm sure, but
but it really just, in my personal opinion, doesn't make a lot of sense because, schools and all entities are encouraged to have a safety net, have a rainy day fund, that kind of thing. And this legislative proposal basically throws that out the window and doesn't anticipate the timing, as we've talked a lot about how, you know, we're cash heavy when we get our property taxes, but then we're really cash low at other points in the year. So there's discussions that was 25% moved to 30. It may go away. It may go to 100%. I think I heard that at one point. The key that they're looking for there is to then say, well, you have too much cash, so we're going to reduce your levies, which have been voted on, et cetera. But just wanted you to kind of, you know, make the public aware of that factor.
Good.
Another proposal which may go away is shortening the forecast requirement from 5 years down to 3. Again, not sure. A lot of discussion about the 5-year being based on levy cycles. And so that's probably where the 5-year forecasting came from. So we'll see that rumors that may go away or be changed. Some separate legislation that we know could have a negative impact would be changes to the 20 mil floor. One discussion, we are currently at the 20 mil floor, which means it keeps some of those reduced levies from falling below that. One of the discussion is adding the emergency levy millage in there, which would then have the effect of allowing us to go down even though we are currently at the 20 mil floor. So that's one proposal. And I think that's separate from the state budget. So that could come in a different format, but so anyway, that was a lot, but I think that's an important slide to go over. The next slide is really updates for this year. So from when we did the November forecast to when we did now, I know Mike's mentioned some of the areas we were looking at with TIF, CRAs, state budget, property taxes, all of that. So I just kind of wanted to summarize. There have been some changes if you look at the November forecast to now. The primary thing is, you know, property taxes and public utility, personal property, overall increased slightly from what we were showing in November, and we have all the settlements now, so that should be pretty much done. State aid, we will get 3 more settlements because we get that twice a month. We do have a pretty good projection now based on what the enrollment data was in April. So there's a little bit of a lag in that calculation. But overall, we do have a moderate increase in state funding for 25 compared to what we knew at November. Other revenue, again, one of the things in doing the projections is we get a pretty large TIF payment from the city in June every year. Last year was a significant increase to 19 million. So we're anticipating that'll be the number again this June. But again, that's one of the things we won't know until it hits. So we pretty much have that flat compared to where we were before.
Excellent.
In terms of expenditures, personal service and benefits, we did do a little bit of an increase. You know, we always have an offset for vacant positions in terms of budgeting. Just based on what our actual spend has been through April, I did increase those amounts slightly based on that. Transfer for debt service, this is probably a good news piece for this year. We budget the, bless you.
Thank you.
We budget the full amount as if we get federal interest subsidy on some of the Build America bonds that we had. Those are sometimes delayed. They've been reduced through federal regulation. So we budget that we're going to have to cover those, that the district would have to cover those if they didn't come through. So when those do come through, it provides a little bit of a budget savings in terms of what we budget for debt service. So I did make that adjustment because we're good for this year. So that was a savings of about $3 million, I believe. So when Henry reflected that, you'll notice if you look at the forecast for the future years of debt service, it's less. And that's not because of this factor. It's because of our payment structure. We do have the $21 million bonds that will be paid off next month. So that will impact how much has to be transferred. Okay. And the next slide is a summary. This is just to kind of summarize what's on the larger sheet. The key thing I'll point out here from November to now. So if you recall, our current budget expenditure for 26 is 624.6, which was based on our revenue projection in November. Now I feel comfortable raising the revenue projection for next year based on those factors I talked about to 628.6. So that's approximately a $4 million additional revenue number. In the current forecast, I left the expenditure levels the same because obviously we do want to build up cash. So there's considerations for the board and it's a discussion to have.
No. Hello.
So yes, we were happy when we worked through everything, looking at where we are. And mainly I'll give credit, it's state funding, it's improved enrollment numbers that have driven that.
Enrollment's critical.
So that'll be a consideration we can talk about in terms of the current year, the target for 26. But then in this graph, the yellow, so what we did is, like I said, made minor changes for FY25. In the yellow, the fund balance after encumbrances at the end of this year, I'm projecting to be 43.5 million for the general fund. Again, this is only general fund. So if you look at next year, I'm letting that grow by the additional $4 million in revenue at this moment, if leaving the expenditure target at 624. Then going forward, the green at the bottom shows the amount of the renewal levy. So they have you pull that out because if the renewal levy were not to pass, they want to show you what the effect of that would be, obviously, which would be devastating if the $48 million were not to pass. But then the other thing with the yellow, the 47.5, so again, keeping that flat in year 3, that is the point, the level at which ODE looks at to determine if they think you're showing fiscal distress. If year 3 was a negative cash balance after encumbrances, that would then trigger a review by them to say, how do you plan to remediate that? Next slide, again, just shows state share versus local share. As you know, we always talk about the burden is really on the local taxpayers primarily at a 63% level. This hasn't changed since November. Next slide has enrollment projections. Again, for 25, this is about 500 students higher than what we were projecting in November.
Good job.
So that's definitely a positive move. And then again, it shows a slight projection every year by about 60 students, and that's just based on our historical, it's a trend.
That'll get bigger, but you have to do it this way.
So, I mean, you know, trying to be, not be too optimistic, but not be too pessimistic as well. The next slide is a projected revenue analysis. I think this is fairly consistent with November. You can see 50% of the revenue sources is real estate property taxes, 7% public utility, about 30% in state sources, and then TIF, CRAs, Medicaid reimbursement, E-rate, all of that is in the yellow category. These slides mainly focus on this overall. One of the things I like about these slides is it gives a longer trend. So it goes back 5 years and it goes forward current year +4. So you can kind of see there's not a whole lot of unexpected wiggle room here. The one blip there is the fact that we issued $75 million in tax anticipation notes for cash flow purposes. But if you were to, and so I starred that and footnoted that, if you were to take that out, you can see the trend is really fairly flat. Like those first 5 years are actuals. Some other anomalies, you know, in 2021, and I didn't footnote it on this particular one, but that's where we had the pass-through funding. So there was additional revenue, but we actually had additional expenses that offset that. So, and this may be a little more evident in some of the others, but the other thing I'll point out is the orange is again the effect of the renewal levy. If it were to pass, you include it. If it were to not pass, you would have to exclude that, which would be again devastating. Next slide. Again, this is showing just property tax revenue. Kind of the blips there go along with the reappraisal cycles. You'll see a little bit of a blip, not a major blip, but that's really one of the things that helped us in 25. Next slide, same thing, public utilities. And then the next two are state funding. Again, I noted there the pass-through funding just to explain that that's a blip and not an ongoing thing. The next one is restricted. This one shows a little more of a blip last year, but part of it is the scale, because we're looking at 33 million versus 31 the year before. But the restricted is based on categorical enrollment and weighted funding and all of that. So this one probably looks a little more, but again, it's the scale that's leading to that. Other revenue on the next slide, all the things I mentioned that go in there. We've had a little bit of an increase, which primarily was TIF related. Again, we're hoping that will continue and maybe build on that just a little bit. Next slide is the expenditure analysis, which is another thing we talk about. You know, really 74% of our budget and expense is personnel related. And then purchase services, which are, you know, a number of things, but primarily contracts, is about 19%, and then the other categories there. The next slide does an expenditure overview. Again, in 24, the $75 million repayment of the tax anticipation notes, if you were to take that out, you can kind of see, again, the pass-through funding in those first 2 years. And then you'll see the projection is pretty much holding that. It's fairly flat. Next slide, personal services. This is, as Mike mentioned, the school-wide pool. So those first 3 years, personal services that were covered in the pool, school-wide pool, were done as a transfer out in the general fund and not showing up as personal services. So that's the reason for that difference. Same with the next slide, employee benefits, purchase services, again, had the pass-through funding. And then other financing sources is where you can see, or other financing uses, I'm sorry, is where you can see the school-wide pool again. Okay, so almost there, bringing it in. The next slide.
This is very, very good.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next slide is the forecast summary. And we added for emphasis that, and this is something I already talked about, but for 26 through 29, this is under the assumption that we're able to fulfill our commitment to hold expenditures at the revenue level. So you'll see revenue and expenditures are flat going forward. At the end, each year, we also have encumbrances estimated at 18.3. We were at 20 million last year. So that obviously affects our cash balance. So we want to make that clear that that's where the 47 million that shows up on the forecast, it's the difference. The difference is the encumbrances there. The next slide is we ran several different scenarios to see what would the governor's impact have, what would the 20 mil floor changes have, all of those factors. And what we did here basically is we did not reduce the expenditures. We let the projections kind of roll, and assuming historical increases, this is almost like a worst case scenario. Although a worst case scenario would also be if the levy didn't pass, and could be other scenarios. But in this case, if we were just to let expenditures roll, at the end of 29, we would be 64 million in the negative. So basically almost $100 million swing. Obviously, we hope we'll be closer to the previous slide, But we just kind of wanted to give some perspective of what that could look like. The other key thing on here is you'll see about 27 is where that kind of our cash balance would be eroded under this scenario. So it kind of emphasizes the need for new money potentially as a discussion, or in the alternative, significant cuts at that point, leading up to that point. Okay, and then the next slide is it does a calculation based on cash on hand. So using that cash balance, actually I had to add the notes at the bottom because I wanted to include the encumbrances there as well. But basically, we're looking at 36 days of cash that's kind of averaged out. But I think we want to be closer ideally to 60 or 90. So kind of hopefully can work towards that in the future. But I think that's all I have as far as the presentation.
Outstanding. Questions? Mr. Craig?
So kind of two questions. One is with regards to our state portion, or state funding, I should say, Kansas State portion, because I would assume we were using a funding formula, which may not be the case. If we are keeping the dollar amounts, so if we go with the House version, would that mean though that that dollar amount still determined based upon enrollment? Or is the House dollar amount not attached to enrollment?
It's tied a little bit to guarantees as well.
Okay.
Because currently there are still 20 guarantee and 21 guarantee. There's talk of that, a proposal to reduce the guarantees going forward. But basically the House version keeps the guarantees and keeps funding basically flat. If you go back to the governor, if you reinstate the full fair school funding plan, it would actually be a reduction in the short term. But advocates for the fair school funding plan, obviously, it's a consistent, predictable, never fully phased in because it needed 2 more years to be fully phased in. So,
yeah, I think the thing that's conveniently, not conveniently, the thing that is intentionally omitted from this conversation between all these budget plans is what the fair school funding plan should fund. And the House budget is we'll just give you what you got last year. And what is it, $20 per student or something like that? There's this tiny increase.
I think so.
So we can actually, we gave you more than last year, but the thing that they omit from the comparison is if the fair school funding plan was fully implemented and they updated the cost inputs to the most recent year, that gap, and that's the thing that they've taken out of the debate.
And I think, again, part of the reason I was asking also is that what we also know is that when you do a straight line dollar budget of like, this is what you'll get, it is a lot easier in some ways to come back and say, well, budget's not working anymore, so we're going to take 2 or 3 million out of this, as opposed to when you do a formula where all these different factors are how you're deriving that dollar amount. So I think that's one of the things for us as a board to be just very aware of when we think about the 5-year forecast, because it's already a weird thing to do a 5-year forecast, given that you don't know what the budget spending will be oftentimes past year 2. But that the reality could be that year 2 or 3 could have a significant difference in revenue based on what the state legislature decides to do. So it is important to think about how do we keep the expenses committed to that. The other point and I just thought it's interesting to see how our revenues changed in some ways and how our expenditures have kind of grown. But the idea with the second summary chart would be just that idea that you held the pattern that we're currently doing with expenditures without any kind of commitment from the board to change anything steady while you did the fluctuations in the revenue, right?
So yeah, we evaluated the revenue based on the projection modules and known factors. And kind of did that independently of the expenditure level because that's basically going to set our ceiling.
Mhm.
In terms of expenditures, when you look at that, the kind of the allocation is just a kind of right sizing to what our prior and current year levels are in each category. But like, the total was dictated by what the revenue was determined to be.
Gotcha. And again, I think that's smart for us to be able to see it that way so that we understand, again, there's hard cuts that you would have to put into the budget if you were losing revenue to even keep it. And to have to go $64 million below even what the normal cost would be with growth of other programming and pay and other kind of stuff. You're really probably talking about that full $100 million difference in reality when you get to year 2029. So I appreciate all the hard work you all did. And again, I think this is just something for us as a board to truly commit to monitoring the expenditures and much more tied to what will happen out of our funding resources, because we're also potentially not keeping some of the federal level. There may be federal dollars that don't come in that would then we have to make a decision as to whether or not we keep this. But you don't. Those are expenses that don't change because our revenues didn't increase from our state resources and others.
Any other comments, questions? You good? For our members, or the superintendent, are there any things that we could tell the treasurer's folks regarding the presentation? Regarding things to maybe emphasize or what have you, any recommendations as to how to present it? I think this was really good. But in a wider audience, I don't know if there are things that you found particularly interesting or fascinating or curious or.
The only thing I would say is I think you will want to really distinguish the summary that is the actual summary that we would be potentially forecasting as the 5-year forecast, again, holding that we would keep revenue or keep expenditures equal to revenue, clear to the other one, which is the alternative summary, and distinguish what that means so that it's not thought of as these are the two options being put before you, but it's to say, this is the option that we're based on these things. Now, if other stuff happens that does not match up to the presumptions we're relying upon, this is what potentially this could look like. Because I think some members will read it as either you have option A or option B. You could have option A, or if the revenue is option B, then we'd have to change what option B's expenditures would look like, or something to that effect to commit to as a board for our forecasts.
I think that's a good point because again, we looked at 4 different scenarios, and that was kind of like the worst case of those. But it is a reality that could happen if all of these negative pressures affect our revenue. It could happen. But that's a good point. I think I can try to clarify that a little bit more on Monday.
We have more scary scenarios, right? We didn't pack it, but there is a series of scary scenarios.
Gold bar for the levy. Oh. I think the gold bars for the levy is very helpful. Not too much. Not too much.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got anything, Mr. Crossett? Okay, I'll get this.
Just to follow on with the idea, you might want to change that alternative forecast chart, maybe even just present it as a chart of expenses only, that an expense trend that would exceed revenue, something so that it doesn't look like an option that Brandon's talking about.
Okay, we can look at that because we could still capture maybe what that negative would be.
Right.
And just show an expenditure growth kind of.
I would want just for the narrative piece. How shall I say it? I want the board to know that you guys, and gals looked at 4 other alternatives, or I don't want them to think that all you do is plug numbers in. The more you can show the board and the community that you're doing an analysis as you're going, you're making some judgments. I just think that would be very helpful, and I think that's reassuring to people, and it makes sense. Jen, you had a comment or two?
Yes, just two points of conclusion. One is that the increase in revenue in 25 is less than 1% change. And so for those who are the accuracy of the forecast, and I would guide against trying to use that to balance next year's budget, because I don't
We
think
all behaved, around the table.
I heard them loud and clear, Jen.
Promise.
yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
I
The
said
second-
no.
Okay, the second point is, I think this forecast clearly says we need new money in 27. So to be on the ballot in 26 for new money.
I would agree with that, and I think we've been saying that, and then we occasionally the board has a discussion. Well, we're not ready to decide that, but actually, it in its own way is decided for all intents and purposes. But for what? You know, it can't just necessarily be capital improvements. There's some operational money that obviously is needed as new money as well. I think there's outstanding presentation. I appreciate it. And we look
Thank you.
forward to Monday. Really good. And again, the more you can help the board understand all the work that you guys are doing and all the brain power that you're using, I think would be useful.
Oh, to that point, one other thing I should have said. In talking with urban treasurers and other treasurers, most of them are using the House version for their forecasting. So that was another factor that kind of led us to go with that scenario.
Good.
So again, just kind of an outreach and getting other inputs in that area. So I think that talks to that point as well.
Excellent. Good. Then our next topic before we go into the executive session that we did mention early before we began is this budget update from the administration. Mike has some items for us to think about, and the superintendent's here as well. And I'm particularly interested in being able to share with President Moffett a way to start to think in terms of formatting this discussion and preparing for actual votes that the board can feel comfortable in doing. What have you got, Mike?
Sure. Thank you. I think it's a good segue as we move from forecast to budget and we talk about controlling expenses and how difficult that is. And we're feeling that through the budget process. So if you go to the next slide, Rob, so what we tried to do here is there's a list of topics that have been floating around. I think you and President Moffett contributed some of them, and there's some other things, and trying to get some time for discussion or some time for guidance from the finance committee. So I tried to break things into, you'll see the next 3 slides, break things into research items. So these are items that we've been asked to research. Some of them may overlap with the list of 100 that we've talked about in the business meetings. Some may be different. And we won't go there, but the next couple slides, one is things we've already realized. So I know some things have been discussed. We can talk about some of the savings we've already realized that are built into the current budget. And then the final one that we'll kind of get there is data to review. So I think it's important, as you mentioned, we talked about packaging and preparing a budget for a vote to get a sense from this committee as reps on the board of what data they'll need to see to feel comfortable moving forward. And so we can start wherever. Obviously, the first slide talked about extracurricular cost. Cody, which will go to the next section. If you go back a slide, Rob, sorry. Cody, which will go to the next section. Cody's pulled out some vendor information. This topic's come up a lot in a lot of different conversations. So thought we could maybe put a pin in that one and be done with it. Third option on here is talking about paraprofessionals. I don't know if the superintendent wants to share any discussions we've had about that at this point. If you like.
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
A couple of things. One, we're looking at how we utilize our paraprofessionals and how we train them and then send them out into the classrooms. And so because of the conversations with the treasurer's office, there may be some adjustments we're able to do with funding them either from the general fund or being able to move them to the title fund in particular.
you want to?
Just,
Keep
just a
moving along.
rudimentary kind of thing. Can we just go down the list and
Sure.
if there is, so the
Yeah.
board, the committee members see anything in particular or the administration sees something they think needs to be emphasized? I'm on the extracurricular. I mean, is that, how many millions of dollars do we spend on extracurricular? Both personnel and the programming itself? Somewhere I've seen something like 7 million or. Do we-
It's probably, I mean, I can tell you the personnel side, what we call Schedule E, is about $2.8 million
Okay.
salaries and benefits. And that number has been consistent for some time.
Flat like our budget.
It has been, and it's been, you know, there's been talk about changing that.
Mhm.
I don't know that anything has really come out of that, but we've definitely been discussed.
Do extracurricular folks have only 1-year contracts?
Yes.
There
Alright.
is I guess, yes, it's a 1-year contract. There is a longevity kind of increase.
Sure.
So if you've done the same thing for, I believe it's 5 years, I'm trying to do this from memory. I believe it's 5 years, there's a bit of a bump you get, so.
But in every school district I'm familiar with, the extracurricular piece is at the end of that particular school year. That's the end of your contract and and the district decides if they want to renew it or not. So that is something to be thinking about. You know, I don't think the extracurriculars are about primary dollars. I think those are the best vet dollars we've got. But still, they're 1-year contracts. Let's be real. The top 10 vendors, can we talk about that
We can.
a little bit?
yeah.
Because I think, at least when I hear from board members, that there is this emphasis on the contracts. And the amounts of money that are being spent
Okay.
in the contracts, the big ones especially, or the ridiculous number of contracts we have, which is about 16 or 1,800 different contracts. Maybe if you could talk some more about whatever your thoughts are about the vendor piece, and does any committee member have any issue about the vendors issue or contracts? Okay. Administration?
Sure. Rob, could you go to slide 7, please? So appreciate Cody's work on this. So I might have him kind of tag
Cool.
in.
Yeah.
But one of the things Cody did, just as a quick request, was look at top 10s in a couple of different ways. So the first one here is top 10 vendors by dollar value. One of the things that I think will come up through this is we talk a lot about vendor contracts. A lot of them are not things we have a lot of control over in some
Right.
regards. And so just there are obviously some, but like the first one, top 10 vendor, Hewlett Packard Financial Services. Those are our device leases. Now we have control over that, but it's something that has to be planned out over a period of time. You know, a lot of these are 3 or 5 year leases, and there's kind of a rolling series of them. I'm sure Jeremy can probably talk better than anyone about this. If you want to jump in, Jeremy, for the Hewlett Packard leases.
Sure, I can just add, like I said, I mean, they're basically leases, so it's more of an obligated cost for the contract. Once we've agreed to it, we have to make payments over a number of years, so it's not, while we have control on the number of devices and how we execute the leases, the ones that we have already executed but carry out over a number of years, we don't have control over being able to just, well, we're not gonna make a payment this year on the devices we've already received 2 years ago. So it does limit some of the lead time that we need to make adjustments to those contracts. It's really not a 1-year factor. It has to be multiple years in advance.
Thanks.
And then you'll see a group in there, you know, that are the transportation contracts. So First Student, UTS, Peterman, those are all our so obviously we've had discussions before about changes to the transportation environment. And obviously change to those, you know, you're not going to see one of these contracts eliminated, but there is a potential to adjust the amounts.
Okay.
From there, United Way is a preschool
preschool.
bonus payment. We do, you know, look at the master agreement. There's some adjustments.
Is the city in any of that top 10 or
No.
no?
Okay. You know, Duke Energy, that's obviously keeping the lights on. So, I mean, You can see Alta Fiber is a group of things. Some of the Alta Fiber things are related back to E-rate. So some of the money that we spend out, we get reimbursed. So you also have to watch out for that.
Okay.
You know, some of your contracts bring you money. So,
What
So-
about the next slide?
okay.
Is it, you have, you said-
Next slide is individual contracts.
Oh, sorry, Jim.
Oh,
For
sorry.
the top 10 contracts, what percentage of the total contract spend do that? Because of the top 10 contracts, what is the total percentage of the total contract spend is that? Is that like 50% of our contract dollars?
Cody, do you know? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
I know.
I'm just
but I can
asking.
find that out very quickly.
That's a great.
I'm just asking, you know, you say top 10, but does that get us the coverage that we're looking for to see where we can make an impact or not?
Yeah. That is. So what are you thinking, Kevin? I'm sorry.
Well, just looking at high level, like purchase services are about 123 million.
Hmm.
And that's 494 million. So I mean, that's a big chunk of.
But wait, this is all funds though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you go to the next slide,
One last question.
but that number's probably better. So that's 63 million out of the top 10.
Go for it.
Sure. One last question. I know in the profit world, they've done some rearranging of capital leases. And I think I don't know if it's coming into any of the accounting standards that we have to do now as a school district. But certainly the Hewlett Packard contract would look like it would be a prime target for accounting for that as a capital lease. Is that something that you've heard about or?
It is one of the things that we provide to Plattenberg, who does our gap conversion. We do provide all those lease terms to them. And you're right, there is a new standard in the last couple of years, and they do an evaluation of that. Some of it is like individual devices may not meet the capitalization threshold. So there's some considerations like that go into that.
Beyond the vendors then, what's the next slide that you thought would be of interest perhaps?
I mean, these are all kind of vendors. I think they're things people can obviously look at. I think one of the things that's interesting is when you look all funds is how much money we spend for student dining. Those contracts tend to bubble up as well.
For student dining?
Yes, to feed our students. So it is interesting how much money we spend to feed our students. And obviously that's part of the federal program. So we're getting reimbursed for
We're
that.
getting the money from the feds.
Yeah.
Well, that's another federal question though,
It isn't.
because that's not coming out of the education department, that is coming out of the agriculture department.
Yeah.
And they're even talking about cutbacks on the agricultural committee, both in the Senate and the House, and that's always been a bipartisan committee, and it no longer is. It's kind of scary, actually. And you know, our two strongest supporters in Washington have always been our previous two senators who prioritized education and the agriculture very strongly, but one Republican and one Democrat. We don't have that set up anymore. I'm very worried about the whole food piece and the agriculture committee and budget. What else do we have?
Do you want to go back to slide 3 or just look at other research items?
Yes, please. Let's focus there for a minute or two.
Right. So one idea that's come up, I think, is to freeze vendor contracts or to have some sort of executive committee for review. So I didn't know if this committee wanted to talk about that.
I think
Craig?
one of my concerns, and again, I think there are efforts to do things to put layers in to create a review, but my concern also though is that we lose opportunity cost with some of these vendors, and especially some of our higher dollar vendors where we're not actually going to make any significant difference, but we're just going to spend a lot of time. And so I think there may be stuff that may be challenges that are new contracts or new things that new vendors we may not have worked with in the past and things, but I also worry that sometimes what we are doing is just creating a layer of red tape that at the end of the day just limits who our vendors would be. You know, again, especially for certain things where we're not really going to significantly change. I think that was one of the things I took from you from the top 10 vendors. Like probably one of those top 10 vendors or something we're going to significantly change anything on. So that's not where we're going to see this huge amount of savings come from, right? And so don't have a problem necessarily saying if there's a new vendor or there's a thing that we're doing differently or there's something that is a significant concept to a vendor. I think a blanket rule of like reviewing in that process may create more red tape than it would create a benefit.
Good point, Mr. Crossan.
So this is just an idea, like a freeze vendor contracts, that's a proposal? So this is just an idea to freeze vendor contracts, that's just a proposal? Or what does that mean?
It's a proposal of a way, because there is a lot of eyes on contracts. I mean, I would say this comes up in every budget discussion.
So
That we have both internally and at the board level. And so
I'm still not sure what that means. I mean, you can't freeze the cost of utilities.
no, you can't.
So I mean, what are we talking about? Help me understand what that means. I'm sorry.
So
That's good.
yeah, so I think the phrase freeze is kind of the idea of just rolling over things, right? So you could say, hey, we've done this for the past 5 years, we're just going to roll it over. So instead of that sort of rollover, having an administrative review process that maybe takes a deeper look into that.
I think we're at a place where we got to take a deep look at every contract we got. I mean, I don't know if we can just keep.
Well, that's what,
I realize that probably takes effort and time, but
I think, and
I think maybe there's a way to do triage on that. Look at the contracts where there's the best opportunity and the biggest low hanging fruit or something, some criteria. And the ones that are more perfunctory, you can maybe just roll over if it's not a big dollar impact.
Yeah,
I mean-
definitely a dollar threshold I could see that making some sense. I don't know. I feel like personally, I've looked at these contracts till my eyes bleed. Like I've done this, but happy to go back and happy to do more work if that's the will of the board.
I mean, I would recommend you go back and do it at some time effective or cost effective level. I mean, I don't want your eyes bleeding. We need you to do other stuff,
Mr. Craig?
I just, again, to reiterate though, we just did a review of all of the vendors, like not even a year ago. And so, I mean, I get like one of the things I am very concerned about is that we're asking a less staff, less serviced central office to do more work. And in effect, to get some cost benefit, it may be a couple $100, right? Like there's not a significant, like I'm sure there are opportunities as we review contracts, as we're starting new contracts, to look at the work being asked. But in the real work to be done on when we're asking for work to be done, whether or not this is work we want to be doing versus what vendors are going to pay for. Because I think that's, to me, makes a lot more sense if you're saying before we go out and say we want to do a whole new tech contract, we're going to look at whether or not what we're asking for is what we need, whether or not this serves as benefit, the KPIs connected to it that we were expecting from it. I and again, I think there's probably some value to it, but if we can't not do transportation,
Right.
and the transportation contracts are kind of the transportation contracts until we get some better provider of transportation at a cheaper rate, or gas prices go down to a level at which you can fill a bus or something to that effect. Like, I mean, I do think it's valuable to look at that information. I think to your point, you've done it. And then we did a whole review that the Budget and Finance Committee went through the presentation on. Cody's done several presentations on the contracts over 200,000, contracts under 200,000. I'm worried that like, if we're spending a lot of time on that, as opposed to what are we actually asking people to do? And if that's something we need to change, then that's on us. At the RFP stage, at the request for services stage, like that's the part I would be more, to me, that's a better space to look at. The other part to it, and I think this is just my philosophy might be different in some ways in this. Some of these contracts we have is because we've asked people to do more, right? Like we did this with thinking about how, like we are doing a lot of these things out of Title I dollars or some of these other groups. And I guess I'm wondering, just of the stuff that's actually general fund spending, how much of that would be significantly changed if we kind of reviewed or went through? Because at least in the one slide with the 96 or 94 million, we keep talking about what was it, Hamilton County, but that doesn't come out of the general funds. So like we can keep talking about it all we want to, but that's not going to significantly change what our general fund number looks like. So that's the other thing. I mean, I think it's helpful to see just the difference between the general fund and total funds.
To that point, about this, the separation between the general fund and the other dollars. Again, we're being held hostage because we're not sure about those federal dollars. So we may need that kind of review because we may not have those dollars. Therefore, we're counting on dollars that we may not get. We might get I understand the treasurer's office is still anticipating that whatever the feds can do, they still can do for our 26, FY 26. So that difference, we might be,
which again,
keep that in mind.
Is helpful if we were saying we have no more title dollars and we don't do title work, right? Like that's something. I think the difference in how we evaluate those contracts are, if we don't have these dollars, do we do it? General fund, some of the stuff we still got to do. Like, you got to pay due. You got to pay.
Well, some of the title dollars we would have to do too.
And I think that's the
Without
we'd
the
have
money.
to decide at that point. And I think I'm fine with us reviewing it if there's a circumstance that changed
Gotcha.
for why the contract. But I guess my issue is reviewing the vendor specific as opposed to the purpose for which we're using the vendor.
Yeah. I just think that I can remember the last year and the year before, there was a slide talking about the fact that what we need to accomplish, we cannot accomplish by little things that you had to redo. And indeed, that's all part of the ad hoc piece, or that's all part of some of the big thinking that we've had to do, is that we're not going to reach our goal on continuing to somebody's point, 1,000 cuts. Just it gets ridiculous. Did you have more to say?
Well, I just think on these contracts, I have the faith and trust in our team to use good judgment on where you want to spend your time. Okay.
Good. Other slides?
Yes, there's some other ideas here, but for the sake of time, just if you want to go some next, Rob, just some, and we'll keep going. Some already realized items.
Yeah, let's talk briefly about that if we could, and see if there's consensus that indeed there is that agreement.
All right. So one of the topics was savings on the GDA redesign. And so just looking at last year to this year, that's about a little under $500,000.
Now, that's not something the board has voted on, but it's something the administration has worked on and has achieved, and that you're counting that toward your budget work.
We
me
did
out.
we did ask the board for support on the redesign.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not saying you went rogue on us or anything. But it isn't something that was a line item vote, but we say go for it.
Correct. You have not voted on this.
We
as a
don't
part-
really want to do line item, whatever. The board is not interested in doing that, but the board's also not interested in doing one, thumbs up, Julius Caesar in the Coliseum about the whole thing. So there's got to be something to work out. Keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's great. Preschool reductions too. We've talked about that. Now, when we talk about budget on Monday, like these savings are baked in. So they're already
Okay, and when the board actually sees the way this works on preschool, there will be board members that are not going to be aware of that. And just be aware of that.
Okay.
But that's part of not asking for more money, correct? I mean, to Brandon's point 2 months ago, that if we were just even to continue to do what we were doing, we needed more money and we needed to request more money. Isn't that correct? Don't I remember
For
that conversation?
preschool?
Preschool.
Well, so the master agreement that we reached with the preschool promise was built on the idea that we're going to work within the 15 million unless we got more money.
Right.
So I mean, I don't think there was that. I don't think we unless we were going to actually make an opportunity, and that was something we could have thought about doing. We still have a working standing as David
Yes.
would be working under that lower amount. So I do think, yeah, I mean, I think
Okay.
that's the operating space we were in. So
There you go. We have to kind of defend that point, Mr. Crossett.
Why do we have 13 less classrooms?
These have essentially been right sized. So for example, a school may have had 3 classrooms assigned, and Vera, her team feels that they can still do it successfully with 2.
I love it.
It's not having half empty classrooms or more than 50% empty classrooms.
Does it represent fewer children?
It's the same number of children
I
overall.
think that's the thing we have to say to get the board behind the concept. If you're right sizing, it's a logistic staff thing. Okay.
Yeah, you could relabel that preschool right sizing instead of reductions might be more helpful.
That would be good.
Yeah. Making a note.
Summer school savings.
And then summer school is again, general, pretty much almost all federal funds except for a couple of schools. So, I mean, you can see we've reduced every year, you know, I mean, honestly, a lot of summer school is a dance between how much money do we have available and what can be accomplished. So it's always a, what do we have to put towards this problem, and then what can we accomplish with that?
Well, and there again, the federal dollars we don't have, then there's choices to be made.
Right.
I mean, we're doing it because we have federal dollars. If we don't have federal dollars, do we not do it? Or do we, okay, this is, in 17 years, that's different for me. The question has always been, will the federal government give us more money, whether it's Obama or whether it was whoever most recently on ESSER. It's never been, you might not have the federal dollars.
Yes, this is a scary time to talk federal dollars.
Yeah, and I think the board needs to fully, and you did a nice job on presenting that, and I think the community needs to know more. What else have we got?
So one, I think, yeah, just for sake of time. So the last slide in here that I think was something to talk about, and I said we explained the $1 billion budget last on the 5th.
Yeah.
So we got that out, and like I said, I did at Cal a discussion about federal funds.
Yeah.
So a lot of these are things that had come up, and so the question is, and maybe it's a thing to get back to us with is what data do you need to see to feel comfortable about the budget proposal? You know, I mean, one of the items in here that I think everyone likes is the per pupil per school cost. So taking every school and saying, okay, for this school, here's how much we're spending. Here's a per pupil cost for that. So you can compare that. I think that's a common thing, but other kind of data points you'd want to see.
Mr. Crossett.
I think on that, it would also be interesting to not compare between schools, but also year over year changes.
Okay. Mr. Craig?
I think the per pupil cost is a nice addition that we've added. I will say I think almost the opportunity cost would be a better measure to me, because you know, technically if you have 20 students in class, the cost of that 21st student is different than the cost of that 19th student. Right. And so when we do just per pupil, it kind of also ignores that there may be some classes that are jam-packed with students or some schools that have a smaller number, and then we have other things in them. So, I mean, almost some level of opportunity cost. I don't think it's something you'll have to do before Monday, but I just think it's in the future. That may be also a good way for us to be thinking about this, is what are the opportunity costs of a program or of a particular resource within the school? Because we did a little bit of that with like counselors and with, I think it was the APs of culture. At one point we looked at where it was
the
attendance. Yeah.
Attendance.
And so like that idea of just what is that additional benefit gain from when you add another student to a class or whatever. Because again, like you have to have a math teacher, regardless of whether or not you have 20 kids in the class or 25. But yeah, but when you get to that threshold where if it's 40 kids now you need a new math teacher, that's a different cost than 50 kids needing 2 math teachers. So.
Okay. Other suggestions for the treasurer's office? And the superintendent? Superintendent have any comments? Treasurer? Mr. Crossett? Mr. Craig?
I just wanted to say, I appreciate adding things to the list that were not just central office. And I say that because I think we really do have to acknowledge and recognize that the district has to operate differently to meet the budget requirements. And so being efficient, being good stewards of of our fiscal dollars requires us to look at more than just saying central office has got to get smaller.
Absolutely.
So looking at schools. I would add looking at personnel. I just, I know we want to do that last thing ever, but the reality is I don't know how you do what we need to do without more emphasis on personnel. So schools, personnel, contracts, I think there's still great interest on the board's part, not necessarily this committee, but on the board's part regarding contracts. You think of other stuff and finding a way to format this so that we can be doing stuff. Well, thanks for throwing some of that stuff out there. Appreciate,
Our
because
pleasure.
I know you guys have been working incredibly hard. And I know there is that list and what have you, that we've seen some parts of that list. And I know you're still working on that list. So it's helpful. Do we have anything for the good of the order for finance before we adjourn into executive session for the purpose of negotiations?
You haven't done hearing of the public.
Do I have public? Oh, okay. Well, I got a few things to ask you, but go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Michelle Dunn, Cincinnati Federation of Teachers. Just a quick observation, and this is something I bring up frequently when I visit, but the discussion around TIF and CRA, just on page 4 of the PowerPoint of the 5-year forecast, it's framed as a revenue. I just think there's some way that we can have this discussion around TIFs and at CRAs that, yes, the revenue's listed, but we don't have the loss of, in the absence of a TIF, what would we be getting? Because we are losing with these TIFs. And I just think it's responsible to make sure that that's reflected in the discussion. And I know we skipped over it in the interest of time under budget considerations, but the reason I bring it up again is it is being negotiated with the city this year for another, multi-year ordinance that sets the rates. And I just feel like we have to be careful about how we're framing this for the public, that it's not simply a revenue. It is something that's coming in, but there's also some losses associated with it. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's an excellent point.
Thank you.
Excellent. And we understand why it's listed as a revenue because it is, but the point is in the greater picture of things, it's a revenue that we would prefer to see even be greater. What have you, sir?
I mean, I agree with what Michelle said in terms of loss. In terms of looking at it here, it offsets. It's a revenue that would have been property tax revenue. So it's a difference between what the property tax revenue would have been and what the TIF revenue is. And over the years, we've had some discussions about exactly what that number is. And it's kind of hard to quantify sometimes, but it really is, part of a discussion and part of the discussion with the renewal of the TIF agreement.
Perfect. Thank you. For the good of the order, I'll take a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of preparing for negotiations.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. Aye. All right, and we'll keep the assistant treasurer and general counsel and